despite my Connie Chungia suit and my hairdo, today I am filled with overzealous anxiety about this conversation. I want to give you some context, some comparable. To a teenage girl, this is like conversing with Justin Bieber and Usher. Okay. That's the context I'm feeling right now, just as a huge groupie fan of both Professor Ha-Jing and David Henry Hwang. But I want to welcome everyone to New Haven and also welcome to this very interesting conversation that we hope to have. And I want to do a couple of things today to open up the conversation. There's a lot to cover. These are two of one of the most prolific writers, not just prolific ChineseAmerican, American-Chinese writers, but as the theme of the festival, serious fun, I think that that's very appropriate for this talk, but in a slightly different manner. We'll start with the fun, and then we'll get a bit serious. Because of the content of much of the books and the plays that both Professor Ha-Jing and David Henry Hwang go through. So what do we want to cover over the next 75 minutes? I want to hope that we focus on three main areas. This is my rice bowl for today. And I'm using a lot of analogy because I'm daunted by the literary brain power in this room. But introduction, let's try to get to know these two writers a little bit better. We're so privy and wonderful opportunity to really get into their thoughts, their inspiration, which is the second topic. What inspires them to write the content that they do? What are some episodes in their own upbringing and experiences that have brought some of this content into the public realm? And third, information. The topic of this talk is U.S.-China literary landscape. And these two writers have really spanned the century, the 20th century and the early 21st century, addressing in many ways some of the significant historical milestones in the U.S.-China relationship. I'm not an expert in that, but I wanted to sort of shed some light on some of that. So let's start off. I want to get to know David Henry Hwang and Ha-Jing a little bit better, and I hope you do too. These are going to be goofy questions, but we want to get to know them a little bit better. And they said anything goes. They didn't know who they were talking to. Okay, so please respond as appropriate. And we'll go from Professor Ha-Jing to David Henry Hwang. American Chinese or Chinese American?
Chinese American, I would say, yeah.
Only respond as appropriate, Professor Ha-Jing. no further context. Chinese
I'm an American citizen, but also I'm from China. So yes. My first 29 years was spent in China. So there's no way for me to get rid of that part. So for me, the two words really that can capture my identity or my being, I think.
And David?
I mean, I think I have to be a Chinese American because I was born here. I don't speak Chinese. I don't really know particularly much about China. And I feel like I've, anything I've learned, I've kind of acquired along the way, which I think is pretty American in terms of being born in this culture and then sort of becoming interested in some other things.
Right. So Chinese American or American? Okay.
Chinese
so
American.
Both Chinese American. Combo A with egg roll or chicken feet?
I would go to egg roll.
Egg roll.
Yeah, I'm a northerner,
okay.
but so.
Okay, that makes sense. Northern Chinese. David?
I'm not that big on egg rolls, but I'm not that big on chicken feet either. Chicken feet is tastier, but I have to watch my cholesterol. So
okay.
I think I'd probably go with the egg rolls, even though it's not my favorite.
All right, good. Bank of America or Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation?
Oh, I use Bank of America. Oh. Yes.
I don't use either of these banks. However, I really like the HSBC advertising campaigns in the airports. When they go, they have like
the world is
like
local.
someone with a tattoo.
Yeah.
No, and then they go, like decoration, ritual. People see the world different ways. I think that's a great advertising campaign. However, I spoke to some people from HSBC, and they were going, "Oh, it's too sophisticated. People don't get it."
Some get it. Linsane or inane? These aren't supposed to be that tricky.
I don't know. Say it again.
Linsane or the whole thing's inane?
No, he has a Chinese name, so Lin Shuhao. I often just think of him as that in that name, Lin Shuhao. So that's why I watch his games.
Did you ever watch basketball before Jeremy Lin?
Yeah.
Okay.
When Larry Bird and Michael Jordan, when they play, I was amazed. When I just arrived in the States in the mid-'80s, I was surprised to see they play basketball that way. I never, in China it was done differently almost.
And David?
I kind of don't understand the question. Okay, there's I get the but I don't understand the analogy.
Is the whole Linsanity a bit
inane?
Inane.
Oh, yeah, I see that name. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's really,
I'm not a literary giant.
Sorry. No, you're just smarter. No, I think it's, it's really a game changer. And for Asian Americans to, especially, Asian American men to have a sports figure who's a hero in a team sport, which is really what we do in this country, more than individual sports, is hugely important in the way that sort of Bruce Lee was a game changer. So not inane.
Linsane. This is a trick question. This picture is of a city called Falashen. Is this city in A, Hunan, B, Shanxi, or C, none of the above?
Looks like it's in Flushing. It's like it just says right there, Flushing.
You're not supposed to. Yes, maybe. Okay.
It doesn't look like Flushing. It really looks like.
It says Flushing.
No, it looks like
That
Flushing.
wasn't
I've
it.
been there many times.
Okay,
It
this
looks
is
like
a small Chinese city, my hometown, that I always call a small Chinese city in China because of the number of overseas Chinese American. But correct, I wanted to see the Chinese name for Flushing is Falashen. And lastly, 2012 Olympics in London. Rooting for the Chinese team or the American team? Where does your heart tug? They're supposed to be neck and neck for the number of medals this year. And as you may remember, in 2008, when Beijing hosted the Olympics, the US just notched forward by about 10 medals, but it's supposed to be very close this year. Are you rooting? Does your heart tug for the Chinese
No,
team?
I really don't care about the medals. I really the individual sports. If I really like the player, the athletes, I would really, for me, that's more important. And for instance, if for basketball, definitely I would root for the United States because that's the game really, the athletes are the best. And it would be insane to root for China in soccer, right? So that's why I would go by games. I don't care about the medals.
Fair, David?
I'm not very good at watching the Olympics, so but if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with America.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, that was the fun part, and I needed to tee it up because of the content that many of you know in these conversations. I did ask the festival for a black backdrop and a wooden round table, and for some reason they couldn't arrange it, but we're okay with with this. And we're going to just go into the conversation now and talk a little bit about David Henry Hwang to start off with. Many of his noted books, as I think we have a lot of fans in the room. He's a prolific writer, playwright, but he also is a screenwriter, librettist, and a renowned author and collaborator with many individuals who we know of, including Philip Glass over the years, and he's currently, according to Opera News, is the most produced living opera librettist and has written 4 works with composer Philip Glass in 1988 and 92 and 96, and also has worked with a number of individuals. I bring this to mind because much of his work is typified by the Asian American identity work that he's done. The East-West Theater just recently named their theater after David. And a number of these plays, M.Butterfly won the Tony in 1988. I was 16 years old and watching it with my jaw dropped the entire time.
Yeah, really inappropriate.
Very inappropriate for me at the
My
time.
16-year-old to see it.
And Chinglish, as many of you know, has recently finished a run on Broadway to very high acclaim, and Yellowface, which was produced after the Wen Ho Lee situation and at the Public Theater. I want to show you just a clip of Chinglish when its recent run.
I have a very strong feeling what you said to me is really important. So please repeat in English.
Such sleepy. You believing Thai, your deal has friendly. No, Thai disassemble.
Disassemble.
起码英语听得懂吧？
David has been writing plays since the 80s. He's been writing for 30 years, which really confuses people when they look at his age and his age currently. But he's been awarded numerous grants, including fellowships in the National Endowment for the Arts, and also from 94 to 2001, David served by appointment on President Clinton's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. He is born and raised in LA, if I'm not mistaken, but now has become a Brooklyn boy with his family where they currently reside. And actually, we'll be able to view a lot of his plays now that he is a Playwright 1 in residence at the Signature Theater, right by, not too close. Did you plan this by the PRC Council General, where you can also get a visa and see Kung Fu, which is coming out later in this year, a revival of Golden Child, as well as the Dance in the Railroad, which
It's
unfortunately.
worth noting that Nancy was an actress in Golden Child when it was done in Hong Kong.
Yes. And I'm bringing.
Yay.
That's why I'm doing my Connie Chung impression now. Welcome, David, and to share a little bit about Hajing, and then we'll go into many of his books. He's both an author of novels, but also a poet, an essayist. He's originally from the northern part of China. His pen name, is actually named after Harbin. Is that true?
Yeah,
Hajing?
first, yeah.
Right, and he was born in Liaoning, China, and many of his books discuss the current issues in contemporary China, as well as recent work on the Chinese-American identity and the immigrant experience. War Trash, The Bridegroom, Nanjing Requiem, which is his most recent novel, and A Good Fall, which also is currently quite a short story selection about contemporary China as well. He is in residence at Boston University, where he teaches. He's also formerly taught at Emory University, and also a number of different awards, including the most famous for Waiting, the National Book Award, but he's also received the PEN/Faulkner Award for his work. On the continuum of US-China history, just to bring you through some of the most notable events in the last 100 years, we have a number of significant events. Many of you in the US-China world knew this. China was founded in 1901. I bring that up because it was originally the Foreign Missionary Society. The first Chinese who attended a major university graduated from Yale in 1854. So it's so appropriate that we actually have this conversation here. Of course, the Nanjing massacre, many heads of state have visited. And over the last 110 years, we've seen a significant number of events, and also the influence of soft power. That's why I sort of have KFC over there to represent in some ways. And through both Professor Hajing and David's work, you see a number of books that have addressed some of the major milestones in US-China history. Golden Child is much about the early missionary that went to China. The Nanjing Requiem during the Nanjing Massacre, War Trash, Korean War, the immigrant experience through many of David's earliest plays, as well as Hajing's A Free Life, Yellowface in back of the Wen Ho Lee situation in 1999, A Good Fall, more immigrant stories, and Chinglish, which I think is so representative of some of the US-China dynamic these days with US-China business. So I wanted to leave it here and maybe open it up for some conversation with David and Hajing, keeping up this timeline for our reference in some ways. You have both written works that are both depict the voice of a Chinese in Chinese, but also in English. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the most significant challenge using this technique. I think you've done it with Chinglish, David. Hajing, you've also most recently spoken from an English standpoint with the immigrant experience, but mixed in Chinese voice. What are the challenges with using this technique, and what have you had to overcome in thinking about your world in both Chinese and English? Maybe I can ask you first.
It really depends where the story is set. If a story is set in China, most of the characters would not speak in English. For me, that means there's no empirical basis. So everything would have to be invented. So that's the challenge. That also implies there is, everything in a way it might be artificial. So everything is created. So that's the difficult part. But again, in a way, I'm slightly in a different situation because my mother tongue is not English. I didn't start to learn the language until I was in my early 20s. So but on the other hand, in the language, in the English language, there have been great writers who came to the States, or who came to the language, the English language, from another language. Eventually, they became great writers. So, in other words, I have a sense of a tradition in that sense. But the problem for all those writers is that the absence of natural vocabulary. That phrase is a quotation from Nabokov. He was asked, what's the secret defect for him as a writer? He said, the absence of a natural vocabulary. For me, that is really a big problem. But again, every book is a struggle. Even if for native speakers, every book is a big struggle. You have to struggle to finish, to labor to finish a piece of work. So I'm used to this kind of difficulties. But this is one of the most challenging, most difficult obstacles.
David?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't actually speak Chinese, so not being bilingual is a huge handicap in terms of both trying to understand China and certainly if I'm writing things that are set there. And I think that's probably why I started out writing almost exclusively about the Asian American experience, because that was something that I had I had some authenticity in terms of that. That's my experience, and that's how I grew up. At a certain point, I started wanting to write more about international issues and being more interested in them, particularly around the time of m.butterfly, I guess was the first piece that did that. And then I did what most monolingual American authors do, which is just sort of assume that people in other countries speak English. So in m.butterfly, it's a French diplomat and a Chinese man who are having an affair, and they just speak English. But that did seem insufficient, really, to deal with what it really means to have a cross-cultural experience. So by the time I get to Golden Child, which is the play that we're reviving in New York this year, I tried this technique where there's a British missionary, and he's visiting a Chinese family. Now the Chinese family is speaking English, and English is standing in for Chinese. So therefore, it seemed to me that if the British missionary was trying to speak Chinese, he would speak in broken English. And that was fun, and that kind of represented something. And then with Chinglish, I finally started trying to write an actual bilingual play. And I'd taken a couple of years of Mandarin in college, so I knew enough to kind of know, well, if you say, well, I need, correctly, it's pretty funny. But I had to work with a Chinese playwright, Candice Chong, who's based in Hong Kong but writes in Mandarin, as a translator in order to kind of really pull that off.
A great deal of your work, both of your works, are based on a true component of either perhaps an experience you had or individuals you've met along the way. I'm thinking about Golden Child, your great-grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, and the story of you dedicate to your son and a good life, or which one is the
Free life.
Yeah, free life, that describes the American experience. How do you manage the challenge of creating a work, a piece of fiction on events that have actually occurred? Perhaps, Hajin, you can start specifically addressing the Nanjing Requiem and some of the challenges with the voice of Minnie Vautrin as a real individual who lived as a missionary during that period of time, and then creating the story around Minnie Vautrin.
In fact, there are a lot of restrictions. If everything is based upon a fact, a real person or historical fact. For instance, in the case of Minnie Vautrin, and there have been two biographies written on her, and so her story was, in that sense, the line is there, the plot is already, the dramatic line is there, and because the backdrop is the huge historical event, the massacre. So there was no way for me to invent real dramatic events for her. So as a result, the novel, it'd be very hard to sustain the narrative drive. There's no energy in the drama. And so that's why I eventually, after many revisions, I made a terrible mistake. I told everything from her point of view, but it did not work because I could not invent any dramatic happenings for her. So that's why, after many revisions, I invented a narrator as her assistant. So the narrator would have her own stories, her own family's suffering. Whenever Minnie Vautrin's story slackens, slows down, and the narrator's story can come in and sustain the narration. So that was very difficult. And in fact, before me, there had been a writer, a British novelist. He also wrote a book on Minnie Vautrin. He encountered the same problem. He invented, in fact, a love affair for her. And so he let her fall in love with a Chinese man, but the Chinese man was married, could not return the love as a result. That's the cause of her breakdown. But for the historical background, Nanjing Massacre, I just couldn't temper with her life. So that was a big problem. So that's my impression. Nowadays, if my students write a story based upon historical figure, first question I would ask, is there a biography written on the person? Mm-hmm. If there's no biography, then there's a lot of room to create.
May I just ask a follow-on, why this period of time in the Nanjing Requiem? What was the inspiration behind writing this book? There have been many books in the past 10 years on the situation, as well as films depicting the situation time.
In fact, it's quite very simple. I want to tell a clear story. Because when I was in China, we heard of Nanjing Massacre, but we never had a clear picture. So history was somehow shaped into different forms. Then everything became blurry. And we just didn't know what happened. And according to political shifts and each time there will be different kind of a story. So for me, it was very simple, just to tell a story and make everything as clear as possible.
David, in Golden Child, your great-grandfather has 3 wives, and he converts to Christianity and chooses the wife that he's married for love, and then proceeds to lead a Christian life. What was the inspiration behind telling that story, and how autobiographical is it? How true to the the story of your great-grandfather is it?
That was a story that when I was 10 years old, my grandmother, who was sort of the family historian, fell ill, and we all thought she was going to pass away. And I, for some reason at 10, felt like this would be doubly tragic in the sense, of course, we'd lose my grandmother, but also we would lose all this history. So I was living in LA, and my grandmother at the time was living in the Philippines, so I asked my parents if I could spend a summer with her in the Philippines, and they were happy to send me off. And I did what we would now call oral histories. I got everything on cassette tapes, because we had cassettes back then. And then I went home and wrote sort of a 90-page nonfiction novel about the history of my family, which got distributed to all my relatives and got very good reviews. And it's interesting in retrospect that that was the only sort of large-scale writing project I ever undertook as a kid until I got to college and started writing plays. So that by the time I got to my mid-30s, and maybe prompted by the fact that my wife and I, we were starting to think about having kids, I went back to this source material and used it as the inspiration for a play. But then, of course, by the time I was in my mid-30s, I had a very different take on some of these events than I did when I was 10 years old, which was interesting also to kind of reinterpret it, because I totally agree. It's really hard to write things when you're constricted by fact. I mean, that's why we have biographies. And I often feel that when I do historical pieces, I need to do the research, but then I need to forget the research to do the writing. Because it doesn't matter if a piece is historical, or it still has to do everything that a regular play or book or story has to do. It still has to have narrative drive, all the characters have to develop, and sometimes life is not like that. In this case, there was enough leeway that there's a lot of ways that I could interpret what my great-grandfather did. And when my grandmother, who did not in fact pass away when I was 10, when she saw the play, she liked the play well enough, but she thought I got a lot of things really wrong.
Right. Thinking a little bit about China today, and when you both started writing, I think China was in a very different time and place than where it's really the burgeoning economy over the last 30 years has created a very different China from when you first started writing. And I think that your work has also gone through that spectrum shift. In one of your earlier plays, David, you end FOB with this phrase, FOB, fresh off the boat, FOB, clumsy, ugly, greasy, FOB, loud, stupid, four-eyed, FOB, big feet, horny, like Lenny and of Mice and Men, FOB, fresh off the boat. Is the term fresh off the boat, does it have context anymore? We're seeing such a different influx of Chinese from China. It's changed so dramatically over the 30 years. Have you thought about that changing immigrant experience within your own thinking in terms of inspiration, or have you considered it for new programs and projects?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's extraordinary that the stereotype of Chinese Americans in most respects has changed about 180 degrees just over the course of my lifetime. So that when I was a kid, Chinese and Asians in general were kind of poor, uneducated, menial laborers, cooks, waiters, laundrymen. And now we have too much money, too much power, and raise the curve in math class. It's an extraordinary shift. The only thing that hasn't changed is this notion of Asians and Chinese as being sort of perpetual foreigners. And that has remained pretty steadfast. And so as a result, I think people still use the term fresh off the boat, but it just has a different connotation. That rather than the fresh off the boat connoting something which is ugly, greasy, big feet, whatever, now there's this other set of stereotypes, really, because it's their stereotypes also. They're just, some people might consider them more positive stereotypes, but they also have a downside. So if anything, there's more kind of a little more fear and resentment and jealousy that sometimes is embedded in that fresh off the boat image.
In fact, I used the word FOJ once. I think fresh off jets, fresh off jets. So that in a way, but I think David just mentioned the conventional, especially Asian males. You can work in restaurant, the laundromats, and But I still think about them. In fact, I just bought a book called The Chinese Laundryman by Paul Seal, and he used the word sojourner. That means these Asian males never blended in American society. They are foreigners. They could not return. I'm still fascinated by those people. I don't think we should forget them. I believe there are still a lot of Chinese Americans live that way. They're in between languages and cultures and society. And so in a way, the term sojourner for them, for their existence, has a lot of validity. And so I'm still thinking, I'm thinking a lot, in fact, about those, that experience.
David, you mentioned that you've recently started traveling to China, and over the last 5 or 6 years, you've taken a few trips. Can you share a little bit about the context in which you've taken those trips and what the reception is like for an individual like yourself with such acclaim?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first time I ever went to China was in the mid-'90s, and that was, early 90s actually, that was with my father and my sisters, and it was before we, any of us had kids, and we went over to, sort of on a roots trip. But then around '05, I started going over because China became very interested in Broadway-style shows. And I happen to be the only even nominally Chinese person who's ever written a Broadway show. So people would call me over to talk about these big projects and, we're building a new theater district, and they never come to anything. But it gave me the opportunity to really see what was going on over there. And of course, I would think a lot of people in this audience have been to China recently, and it's sort of mind-blowing. And there's an incredible kind of, feeling of optimism on the one hand, in the sense of the society advancing, and certainly economically. And then there's also, I think, a sense of unfairness that sometimes that lingers not too far beneath the surface. That somebody else is getting ahead unfairly, and a kind of ambivalence about the kind of uber capitalism and rampant consumerism and income disparity. So all those things, and it's a really fascinating mix. And I just want to learn more about it.
And what is the reception like of the hosts?
I have to say, I always thought that I was going to go over to China and, I was going to be sort of ashamed to be such a bad Chinese, and everyone was going to sort of make fun of me. And I've been kind of moved by the fact that I'm kind of accepted as a Chinese over there. I'm an overseas Chinese. I'm a particular kind of Chinese, but I'm still regarded as Chinese. And I think that's because China's so big and diverse that there's been an acknowledgement that there are all sorts of different kinds of Chinese. So I fall into this little category, but I still am part of this larger thing, Chinese thing. And I find that interesting.
Hajing, you have not been granted a visa to return to China since leaving. How does that weigh on you personally? And also, what is your vision of what things are like? What do you think you would be most surprised with if you went back to Liaoning?
I don't know. Maybe I can't recognize, where I grew up. Maybe everything has changed. But because that, in fact, psychologically, it really affected me as a writer. Because China, no matter what, is a huge existence I have to face. Also means I cannot write about the current China anymore. I have to look for my own subject matter. And psychologically, there might be anger too. That anger can be converted into energy. But in other words, I have to figure out how to exist without a direct reference to China. But that doesn't mean I want to cut off myself off my past. That would be impossible. But I have to, at some point, at some moments, in some areas, I have to go beyond China. And so everything boils down to the personal existence. I have to figure out how to continue.
I'm going to open it up for questions in just one more question, so please prepare them, and we'll probably have time for about 6 questions, so be prepared. But one final question from me, and it's been such an honor to have this conversation with you and to get to know you over today, and obviously I know your work so well. Are you living the American dream as you define it, Hajing?
Really, I think because I grew up in China, really I don't have that kind of optimism. I don't believe in the pursuit of happiness. I do believe, I do believe that as an individual, we should be happy, but there are a lot of responsibilities, a lot of other concerns. So in other words, I have my own values, and that's my position. But one thing I would say, I want to live honestly. That's what American life can give me. So that's more important for me, more precious.
To live honestly.
Honestly, yes.
Is that faith-driven in any way?
No, I think you speak your mind, you write what you believe in, and also you treat people in an honest way, to be a decent person. I think you don't lie. Basically, where you don't have to lie to survive. I think that is a big difference between current Chinese life and American life. I think the best thing I can have here is to live honestly.
David, the American dream, are you living it?
First of all, I just want to say something about your comment about the pursuit of happiness. It's very interesting. You know, Joan Chen, the actress, once said to me that when she came to America, she was kind of shocked by the notion that this pursuit of happiness was in a government document. Because what does that have to do? You know. Anyway, I, you know, to the extent that the American dream at this moment in history might very well involve something that some aspect of show business. I guess I am. I mean, I think of myself as incredibly fortunate in the sense that I started wanting to write plays in college. I found that I was attracted to this sort of the subject matter. And then at some point I said, Sam Shepard was a mentor of mine, and I said, well, you know, I should be able to write about some of these subjects and have as good a career as Sam Shepard. And I don't know that I have as good a career as Sam, but you know, I've been able to sustain a career for a while as an artist, and I think that's writing about something that I want to write about, and I think that's hard to do, and so I feel very fortunate. And if that's a dream, if it's an American dream, I think it's just a dream. You know.
Thank you both so much, and I really would like to hear your questions. May I encourage you to be succinct and ask a question, not so much a comment, and feel free to introduce yourself, but introduce yourself and then a succinct question for both Hajing and David, or just one directed. Can I see, yes, right here in the white? Yeah, and we'll have microphones coming your way.
And while the microphone's going over, I just want to give you props for the PowerPoint thing. It's pretty awesome.
Yes, that's what I learned at Goldman Sachs. So we have one here, and then the second question, just so you can tee up the microphone. Don't be shy. Yes, right there in the back, the young lady. Yes.
Could either of you comment on Chinese perceptions of Chinese Americans? And I mean specifically things like the term banana, which I guess is, you know, among the current immigrants is common among current immigrants from China. And can you just comment about that, please? And
just to clarify, Chinese Americans' perception?
No. Chinese perceptions of Chinese Americans.
Oh, so Chinese people in China's perception of Chinese Americans. Maybe David, since he's been there more recently.
Yeah, I mean, the banana, by the way, the banana term is not particularly new. The banana term was around when I was a kid. But I don't know, I think it shifts. You know,
you might have to explain it.
Oh, I'm sorry, banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. Sorry.
Not a Sunday.
That's an American term.
Yeah.
In fact, it's been
Yeah.
around for a while.
So, so I think if anything, it's an American term that's migrated over to Asia.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment, the most recent thing I've heard is that Chinese American men are getting are kind of starting to be considered hot in China because
Yes,
the
yeah.
idea is that, you know, okay, you get some of the advantages of marrying a Western man, but the Chinese men are more, you know, sort of family oriented, and so that's the latest I've heard.
And we have a young lady over there, and if anyone raise your hand if you'd like to be queued up for, yes, number 3, yeah. Please.
Hi, my name is Malenki and I'm 13, and I was just wondering who or what was your inspiration?
Hadi?
You know, I wouldn't say inspiration, and in my situation, you know, I had to survive because I planned to return to China. I wrote a dissertation in comparative poetics. I couldn't find any job, so I shifted a little bit to started writing fiction, poetry and fiction, and I think there is the hunger within myself. For me, I think to write is, in a way, is to satisfy that hunger and to make something. And beyond that, I think is to prove that I'm alive. I still exist as an individual. Of course, in another interview, I said something like, in China, we were taught to serve the revolutionary cause. You are supposed to be a gear, a school, a boat, in the revolutionary machine. That means you are not supposed to have your individual characteristics, qualities. But I want to be a person with a voice. I think that is the only motivation.
David?
I think I write plays because they help me find out how I really feel about things inside. That the writing is for me about learning to access my subconscious, my unconscious, and I learn things about myself that I didn't know consciously. Many things that sometimes, you know, something comes out in, I think a lot of writers have this experience, something comes out in the work first and then it predicts something that happens in your life. So I think my unconscious knows more than my conscious, and I'm able to access it through the writing.
Great, we have a question here. Anyone else for questions after that? Okay, right here, number 4, after this young woman.
I was born in the time during Chinese Revolution, and I come here right after Tiananmen Square happened in Beijing as a college student to come to this country to pursue American dream. And I did not have culture shock after I come here, but every time I go back China for a visit, I have anti-culture shock. And my question for you is, for our children, for younger generation, American-born Chinese and the banana, other people call, I understood that the history is made by human being. How can we tell the real story, what happened in China to our children, our younger generation?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there, in a larger sense, that's the historian's job, but because in contemporary Chinese history, stories or facts had been told differently. So, of course, in a way, as a fiction writer, you know, we try to tell a true story. That's the only thing we can do. But to what degree everything historically accurate, that it will be very, very difficult, because there will be too many constrictions. But on the other hand, the spirit of the story, all the little work should be true, should be able to touch people, to move people. I think that's all we can do, you know. And we don't think, as a writer, I don't think we can think too much of ourselves. For me, especially, fiction is probably the form. All my energy, all my existence is on piece of paper, on the page. So, and that's the only thing, in fact, that everything counts on the page. And that's different from opera or play. It's really different. For me, it's just to write well and try to be truthful and try to be honest. I think that's all I can do.
David, would you like to
I have nothing to add to that.
Okay.
Great answer.
All right, great. Right here, a question, and then we have in the blue shirt in the back after this young man.
Sure. My name is Dilong. I'm a rising sophomore at Yale. I'm from Beijing, China. So I'm curious. So as we all know, China and America, have a new relation in the new century. So what do you guys think are your responsibilities and goals as writers who can consolidate this bridge between China and America? Thank you.
David, that's an easy one.
The whole idea of what is the responsibility of the writer is a very charged question. And I feel like when I started out, there was always well, what's your responsibility as an Asian American to other Asian Americans? And now I'm starting to get more of a sense of, questions about, well, what's your responsibility in the sort of bridging East and West? And, ultimately, I don't think that, I think that if that is the primary goal, then if that's an individual's primary goal, then probably another profession is a better thing to do. That I feel like as a writer, all I know how to do is try to tell the best stories I can about something that I'm interested in and try to be as truthful as possible in telling those stories. And if as a tangential result of that, people understand each other better on different sides of the Pacific, yay, but that's not why I'm doing it.
Wonderful.
I think, as a writer, I think I've said this time and again, I'm not responsible for any country. At the most, I can responsible to my characters. I can't, because that's beyond me. And also, what is a country? And very often, this is just the emotion, an idea. China as a entity or as a place that has changed constantly. For me, I'm more concerned about a person, an individual person.
Great. We have in the blue shirt, and then the final question right here in the second row.
My question's for David, playwriting and theater. Back in the 80s, we had Arthur Miller, and we had a number of American playwrights go to China to teach Western theater. And I just wonder, on your trips, are there any Chinese there that might be ready to make plays for the Western stage? Do you see anything in that area? Are there any permanent effects that have lasted and that you, in terms of education and theater, professional growth for Chinese type?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very vital contemporary theater scene in China, underground theater, a lot of interesting writers. Now, again, I'm limited because of language, but what I'm trying to do actually right now, and we haven't really announced this yet, but is pull together a symposium to try to bring some of the best contemporary playwrights working in China now, or in in Greater China, to the States, and to hear some of those works, to learn from them, because right after the Cultural Revolution, having Western artists go over and Western experts go over and begin to sort of revitalize China's artistic scene was really important, but it wasn't certainly. China has a very long theater tradition, and even in terms of spoken word drama, it's not a recent tradition. So the problem, if anything, is that in America, we're just not that interested in plays that come from foreign countries unless it's England. And I mean, even think of how many contemporary German playwrights get productions in New York. So we're very myopic that way. Nonetheless, I'm interested in learning more about Chinese playwrights, so I'm going to try to bring a number of them here to the States.
Can I follow that up? There's a lot of historical and cultural interest in China. You would think that, as you spoke about biography, it sounds like the framework for wonderful plays are there, and there's no interest in tapping it, or is it?
Thank you, and then we'll move to the final question.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in writing some of them, and just in terms of, yes, I would think there would be more interest right now in contemporary Chinese playwrights than there has been in previous decades, but we'll see.
After we have the final question, we will be treated by a reading by both Ha-Jing and David Henry Hwang, and then you'll have an opportunity to purchase Nanjing Requiem and Chinglish, and they will actually indulge us and sign the books. So look forward to that. Final question right here.
Well, my question is for Mr. Jen. When you wrote the war
Trash?
trash, thank you, were you taking a major risk, and if so, are you sorry about it?
Did you take a risk writing war trash about the Korean War?
In what way do you mean? What do you mean by risk?
Well, it's a devastating story.
Okay, sure. But I think in a way psychologically there was the need for me
Because I served in the Chinese army for 5.5 years, and that's the most difficult issue for us to deal as a soldier, because we didn't know. I don't think my fellow soldiers were afraid of death, but we are frightened to be captured by the Russians. We didn't know how to deal with that, and we had seen prisoners, returned prisoners, mistreated as semi-criminals. So, and that means if you caught by the enemy and came back alive, you will bring disgrace to your family. It would be very hard for a young man to survive in a society like that. So for me, there was the need. It's a personal need. In fact, I had nightmares for over years. But when I started, I thought it would be a very short novel, but it just this continued. It became bigger and bigger. So for me, there was almost like a purge in a way to get all the bad feelings out.
Moderator's liberty here. What's next? And we'll keep it within the room. We won't tell anyone. What's next, Ha-Jing?
I'm working on a novel set in the States and also in China, and about the Chinese man. You see, I think Chinese man, but who came to the States or eventually died here. Yeah.
That's not a lot of specificity. But we'll go with it. David, what's next?
We are doing the season at Signature, the revivals of a couple of older plays of mine, as well as, assuming that I finish writing it, I've been working on a musical for a long time about Bruce Lee, and I couldn't get it. And so I've rebooted it basically as a play with live music and dance. So it's sort of like a musical, but without the songs. Because that was like the hard part. Like once you try to make Bruce Lee sing, it's like very, very South Park, not in a good way. So anyway, so that will be my third show at Signature, and then I'm also working on the movie version of Chinglish right now, and a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great. So may I impose on Ha-Jing to read first from A Good Fall, and then David?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to read from the first story here. It's called The Bane of the Internet. And it's a very short story, but I'll read the second half. And the situation is that a sister living in, who lives in Flushing, suddenly she was contacted by her sister through email. So they stopped writing letters and they began to email communication. And then the sister in China wanted to buy a car, and the sister in the States, United States, tried to dissuade the Chinese sister, but they couldn't see eye to eye. So here they continue. Then why couldn't she just go ahead and buy a car if that was what she wanted? She replied, "You don't get it, sister. I cannot drive a Chinese model. If I did, people would think I am cheap and laugh at me. Japanese and German cars are too expensive for me. so I might get a Hyundai Elantra or a Ford Focus. Please lend me $10,000. I'm begging you to help me. I'm begging you to help me out. That was insane. Foreign cars are double priced in China. A Ford Taurus sells for 250,000 yuan in my home province of Sichuan, more than $30,000. I told Yuqin an automobile was just a vehicle, no need to be fancy. She must drop her vanity. Certainly, I wouldn't lend her the money, because that might amount to hitting a dog with a meatball. Nothing would come back. So I said no. As it is, I'm still renting, and I have to save for the down payment on a small apartment somewhere in Queens. My family always assumes that I can pick up cash right and left here. No matter how hard I explain, they can't see how awful my job at the sushi house is. I waitress 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. My legs are swollen when I punch out at 10 p.m. I might never be able to buy an apartment at all. I'm eager to leave my job and start something of my own, a snack bar or a nail salon or a video store. I must save every penny. For 2 weeks, Yuqin and I argued how I hated the email exchanges. Every morning, I flicked on the computer and saw a new message from her, sometimes 3 or 4. I often thought of ignoring them, but if I did, I'd fidget at work, as if I had eaten something that had upset my stomach. If only I had pretended I had never gotten her email at the outset, so that we could have continued writing letters. I used to believe that in the United States, you could always reshape your relationships with the people back home. You could restart your life on your own terms, but the internet has changed everything. My family is able to get hold of me whenever they like. They might as well live nearby. 4 days ago, Yuqin sent me this message. Elder sister, since you refused to help me, I decided to act on my own. At any rate, I must have a car. Please don't be mad at me. Here is a website you should take a look at. I was late for work, so I didn't visit the site. For a whole day, I kept wondering what she was up to. My left eyelid twitched nonstop. She might have solicited donations. She was impulsive and could get outrageous. When I came back that night and turned on my computer, I was flabbergasted to see that she had put an ad on a popular site. She announced, "Healthy young woman ready to offer you her organ in order to buy a car, willing to sell any part as long as I still can drive thereafter. Contact me and let us talk." She listed her phone number and email address. I wondered if she was bluffing. Perhaps she was. On the other hand, she was such a hothead that for a damned car, she might not hesitate to sell a kidney or a cornea or a piece of her liver. I couldn't help but call her names while rubbing my forehead. I had to do something right away. Someone might take advantage of the situation and sign a contract with her. She was my only sibling. If she messed up her life, there would be nobody to care for our old parents. If I was living near them, I might have called her bluff, but now there was no way out. I wrote her back, "All right, my idiot sister, I will lend you $10,000. Remove your ad from the website, now." In a couple of minutes, she returned, "Thank you, gonna take it off right away. I know you are the only person I can rely on in the whole world." I responded, "I will lend you the money I made by working my ass off. You must pay it back within 2 years. I have kept a hard copy of our emails, so don't assume you can write it off the loan. She came back, got it, have a nice dream, sister. She added a smile sign. Get out of my face, I muttered. If only I could shut her out from if only I could shut her out of my life for a few weeks. If only I could go somewhere for some peace and quiet. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the name of that short story is The Bane of the Internet.
Yeah.
And David?
I'm going to read from Yellowface. This is a play about an Asian American playwright named D.H.H. who wrote M.Butterfly. He, at a certain point, gets involved in protesting the casting of Jonathan Pryce as the Eurasian pimp in the musical Miss Saigon when it comes to Broadway in 1991, claiming that this is a case of yellow-face casting, and everybody disagrees with him. And then Jonathan Pryce ends up getting cast in Miss Saigon, and everything, you know, that show goes on to be a hit. So this scene takes place about 6 months to a year later. And it's a conversation between D.H.H. and his father, H.Y.H., who's an immigrant from Shanghai who came to America and is now a successful banker. And there's a sound of a ringing telephone, and D.H.H. says, "Hello? Dave? Hi, Dad. Wait a second." His voice filters through an echo effect with feedback. "There." David says, "What happens to the connection?" "I'm using my new speaker phone." "Well, it sounds like crap." "What?" "I said, it sounds like, could you speak up? It's hard to hear over this thing." "Then pick up the receiver." "I'll turn up the volume." The feedback cranks up. "Ah, your mother, just pick up the phone. She didn't tell me how to work this thing." "Pick up the phone." "But that would turn off my speakerphone." "Your speakerphone is shit. Why you gotta talk like that?" HYH picks up the phone, the sound effect goes out. "You're right, that speakerphone is shit." "Dad, I'm a little busy right now." "Doing what?" "Trying to write a new play." "Good idea." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I said it was a good idea. It's only been 3 years since M.Butterfly, but you've been smart. Keeping your name in the newspapers, that's good, son." David says, "Oh, you mean all that Miss Saigon stuff? Thank God, it's finally starting to die down. But so many articles on you, free publicity." "But everyone disagreed with me." "Everyone. All the big shot guys, Dick Cavett, Ed Koch. Here, wait, this one my favorite. You saved the articles? I am ashamed of my union actors' equity." "Oh yeah, Charlton Heston." "When I was working in a laundry, could I ever have dreamed that one day Charlton Heston would write about my son?" "I'm telling you, this is the land of opportunity, and that Miss Saigon, such a big hit." "Don't remind me, okay? Looks so beautiful, all those girls, classy. They're half naked, playing prostitutes, but they're classy prostitutes. You haven't even seen the show. But I saw pictures in the newspaper. That producer, what's his name? Cameron McIntosh. He talks about the musical, so beautiful. A young Vietnamese girl who gives up her baby to find a better life in America. Actually, she dies." "What?" The girl, she kills herself. It's her baby who finds a better life in America." "That's even more beautiful." "It's Madame Butterfly set in Vietnam." "Dave, you should do something like that. Is that what your new play is about? Madame Butterfly set in Vietnam?" "How could I possibly? It's already been done." See, I'm just so ignorant about these things. Besides, I already wrote a play criticizing Madame Butterfly. "What play was that?" M.Butterfly. "Oh, right. You know that M.Butterfly? Your play is a little weird. We've been over this. When I come to New York next month, can you get me some tickets?" to see m.butterfly? It closed last year. No, Miss Saigon. I can't believe my good friend, Dick Buttress, chairman of United California Bank, he told me he was in New York last month and he couldn't even get a ticket. I told him, next time you go, ask my son. What? I told him, my son, he knows the producers. They're good friends. He worked on the show. Dad, I protested the show. What's the difference? That Macintosh, he knows how much you've done for his show, and I'll tell you something. He's grateful to you. Fine. I'll get you tickets. I'll get your friend tickets. Anyone who you know who can't get into Miss Saigon, just have them give me a call. Thanks, son, but not right now. Why not? Because you're working. I'm trying. What are you writing about? Nothing. Your father's just curious. It's about Rudyard Kipling, okay? The guy who wrote The Jungle Book, Kipling. I'm working on a play that deconstructs his life and work. Dad? I'll tell you the thing about Miss Saigon. You know why it's such a big hit? Not really, because it's real. A Vietnamese prostitute falls in love with some white soldier and kills herself so her baby can come to America. Things like that happen all the time. How can you say, you don't know how much people want to come to America? I see that girl and I think, she's like me. You killed yourself. No, but I would have. That's how much I wanted to come here. Even when I didn't know anything more about America than I saw in Shanghai at the movies. Even then, I knew my real life wasn't the one I was living in China, second son of a cheapskate father who didn't even know how to talk to his children. I knew that was a fake life, and my real life was here. All those movie stars, Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable and Frank Sinatra, they were the real me. So when I finally got here, I kept on pushing until one day, after I started the bank and it became a success, I looked around at my office on the 39th floor, my house, the swankiest part of San Marino, my Mercedes, my kids all in top colleges, and I thought, now, I am finally living my real life here in America. That's why the girl kills herself. Because when you can see your real life and it's someplace else, then what's the point? If you lose hope you'll ever get there, then even if you kill yourself, it makes no difference. Dad, I gotta go. Sure, son, but why? I think I know what I want to write about. Something besides that Jungle Book guy? Yeah, good.
Join me in thanking the festival for putting this all together, and Ha Jing and David Henry Hwang.